And now to our top headlines. Israel is expanding its war on Iran and Hezbollah in Syria to additional areas, possibly up to and including its borders. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed this in the weekly cabinet meeting Sunday when he said, quote, "We're working to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons against Iran's consolidated military presence against us and operating against the transfer of deadly weapons from Syria to Lebanon or their manufacture in Lebanon. All of these weapons are for use against the state of Israel, and it is our right, based on the right of self-defense, to prevent their manufacture or transfer." Until now, Israel operations have taken place on Iranian bases, command centers, and weapons deliveries in southern and central Syria, as well as against facilities shared with Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards units. Depka sources report that Israel's efforts will expand up to the Syrian-Iraqi border, as well as to the Lebanese border. This movement marks the next step in Israel's military operation to eliminate Iran's military presence in Syria. In the first stage, the IDF disabled Iran's command centers in Damascus up to the Israeli border in the southeast and reduced Iranian radar and air defense capabilities. Damage was also caused to Iranian arms consignments of long-range surface missiles and advanced mobile anti-air missiles. Depka sources reveal that Iran and Hezbollah are still figuring out how to deal with this second stage of the Israeli offensive in Syria, especially since Israel has put Moscow in the picture on its coming operations. The Trump administration issued a military warning to Russia and Syria on Saturday to hold back on their offensive for capturing the Dara region in southwestern Syria. The State Department said that the U.S. would respond to ceasefire violations in the de-escalation zone with appropriate measures in response to the pamphlets spread by the Syrian government urging U.S. and Jordanian rebel fighters to lay down their arms. Washington understood that the Syrian and Hezbollah forces were ready to go after being promised Russian air support. The U.S. intelligence also reported the arrival of Russian officers and mercenaries to lead the Syrian Hezbollah operation. Last Tuesday, Depka intelligence sources reported that Syrian and Hezbollah forces were gathering at the southern town of Isra, which is the Iranian command center for eastern Syria, in preparation for their Dara offensive. Their objective is to fight their way through to the Syrian-Jordanian crossing of Nasib, posing a threat to Jordan and being prepared for their next operation against Kenitra, across from Israel's Golan border. Jordan and Israel told the U.S. that the offensive needed to be stopped or else both armies would intervene. State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert issued a statement that asked Russia to, quote, "exercise its diplomatic and military advantage over the Assad regime to stop attacks and compel the Assad regime to cease further military offensive for broadening the conflict." Depka military sources reveal that world powers are shifting away from the conventional two blocs and reshuffling into a new format in Syria. U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin reached a secret understanding regarding Syria last September and are keeping the land west of the Euphrates River under Russian control and the area east of the Euphrates under U.S. control. Russia and the U.S. also agreed that a political settlement of the Syrian conflict would include the withdrawal of all foreign military forces from Syria. Putin tried to persuade Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to go along with the U.S.-Russian agreement. When the two leaders spoke in Sochi last Friday, May 18th, Putin stated that, quote, "all foreign troops must withdraw from Syria after the start of the political settlement." Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated that there are, quote, "regular and irregular forces from some countries in Syria whose presence is illegal, according to international law." Foreign troops in Syria may leave after the beginning of the political process if their presence turns out to be illegal. There are some countries that have cooperative military relationships with Syria. Russian troops are in Syria at the request of the regime of Bashar al-Assad. They're there legally, unlike some other countries whose presence is a violation of international law. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Bahram Qasemi responded that the U.S. and Turkey were deployed illegally in Syria and should withdraw their forces, stating that, quote, "no one can force Iran to do anything. Iran is an independent country that determines its own policies." Tehran was additionally vexed by another aspect of Russia's policy in Syria, the claim that the advanced air defense systems maintained by Russia in Syria were there to protect its own forces, not to protect Iranian targets from Israeli airstrikes. On Saturday, Washington announced that the U.S. was withdrawing its involvement in northwest Syria and will redistribute the $200 million that they had previously considered investing in the northwest to other projects. European nations have been discussing Russia's involvement in Syria. Jean-Yves Le Drian, the French foreign minister, had this to say.
La Russie n'a pas intérêt à ce que la situation en Syrie s'envenime. D'abord parce que ça lui cause beaucoup de déboires au niveau de son image internationale, mais aussi parce qu'elle a ses risques terroristes propres, ce qui d'ailleurs fait un point commun de nos intérêts communs.
Last Saturday, ground strikes hit Iranian Revolutionary Guard centers in Syria, indicating a shift from airstrikes to ground tactics against Iranian military targets. Previously, Israel had been using F-15 and F-16 fighters. In the past 4 months, Israel's strategy to evict Iran's military presence in Syria has resulted in one F-16 jet being shot down. Military experts have wondered how long Israel would stick to airstrikes, as many of Iran's scattered military positions are out of reach from the air and can only be demolished by ground action. Depka military sources reveal that on May 18th, a base in the northern town of Hama was attacked when a ground force released a series of missiles from a position opposite the base. The explosions leveled Revolutionary Guards' arms, ammunition, and military equipment depots and were powerful enough to destroy the Syrian Air Force facility that shared the base. The entire complex was burned to the ground. Israel is the only country in the neighborhood with the capabilities and motivation for this type of attack. On Monday, another Iranian facility was attacked by missiles from the ground. The target was the Syrian Military Academy near Damascus, which housed Iranian and Hezbollah intelligence departments, as well as an Iranian electronic warfare facility. Israel did not admit to or deny the attacks, but there was a clear mission to get rid of Iranian military facilities in Syria, while Tehran was constrained during the talks with the European nations for a renegotiated nuclear deal. These nations asked Tehran to be willing to give up ballistic missile development to convince the Trump administration to reconsider the U.S. exit from the pact. Iran was impacted not only by Trump's withdrawal from the nuclear deal, but for the failure of their candidate to win Iraq's general election. Israel also wanted to get back at Iran for orchestrating the Palestinian outbreaks in Gaza and assisting Hamas in attempting to take down Gaza's border fence and invade civilian locations. IDF soldiers were forced to stop the attacks with guns, which left 60 Palestinians dead and thousands injured. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo demanded that Iran abandon its Islamic revolutionary policies.
This is a shared threat across the world, and I am confident that we can collectively develop a diplomatic response that achieves the simple outcomes that we put forward. The Iranian people get to choose. The Iranian people get to choose for themselves the kind of leadership they want, the kind of government that they want. They get to choose the individuals who lead their country, and then they get to live with the choices that those leaders make.
Following Pompeo's demands, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei warned the UK, France, and Germany that Iran would continue uranium enrichment unless they joined forces against the U.S. Khamenei made several demands, including that European banks guarantee continued trade with Iran, that they stop urging Iran to negotiate its ballistic missile program, that they guarantee Iran's oil sales, and compensate Iran for the losses caused by U.S. sanctions. Heiko Maas, German foreign minister, stated that Europe and the U.S. are divided over how to proceed with the Iran nuclear deal in light of the U.S. withdrawal.
Ich glaube, dass wir von einem Kompromiss noch weit entfernt sind. Wir schlagen zwei völlig unterschiedliche Wege ein. Der Weg, den wir zusammen mit den Franzosen und den Briten verabredet haben, ist der, an dem wir in Europa weiter arbeiten werden. Ich bin mir sicher, wenn es zu einem Treffen von den Vereinigten Staaten, Deutschland, Frankreich und Großbritannien kommen wird, dann werden wir auch noch konkretere Informationen bekommen, wie der Weg der Vereinigten Staaten sein wird. Insofern gab es nur bekannte Positionen, die hier ausgetauscht worden sind. Neue Forderungen an uns sind nicht gestellt. Und ich glaube, dass man im Moment auch nicht davon sprechen kann, dass ein Kompromiss in Aussicht steht. Dafür sind die Wege zu unterschiedlich, die wir beschreiten. Aber darüber müssen wir weiter reden.
Aladdin Bourgerdi, chairman of Iran's Parliament National Security and Foreign Policy Commission, tried to dismiss Pompeo's demands as irrelevant, accusing him as being misguided and undiplomatic. Yet Iran is facing international isolation as a result of the agreement between Trump and Putin to evict Iranian forces from Syria. Iran assumed the Trump administration would negotiate a revised deal, which would give Iran time to maneuver the terms as they did with the previous agreement. But now the leaders of Iran are threatened with 3 penalties if they do not meet Pompeo's demands. First, they'll face what Trump has claimed will be the worst sanctions in history. Second, they face U.S. and allied attacks on military and nuclear facilities in Iran. Third, there would be rioting and unrest in their large cities over extreme shortages and empty shelves in their shops. European leaders could protest that after the U.S. withdrawal from the deal, they remain faithful. However, there's no way they can compensate Iran by covering the cost of the fallout from U.S. sanctions. Large European corporations have already given up their business ties with Tehran, including British Petroleum, French Total, German Siemens, and the Global Alliance. The leader of Lebanon's Hezbollah said that U.S. sanctions would not impact the movement, but could harm its backers. Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas has just been released from the hospital, yet his health is on the decline. As a result of his health status, the Palestinian headquarters in Ramallah have been discussing the successor, but have remained silent on the subject. Depka sources claim this is explained by the fact that the Palestinians' political, regional, and international standing is in decline, as well as that the Palestinian Authority heads in Ramallah have agreed on a distribution of jobs and areas of influence. Several months ago, Abbas named his successor the Secretary General of Fatah, Mahmoud al-Alul, who controls the Fatah Tanzim paramilitary arm in the northern Palestinian districts. His main rival is Jibril Rajoub, the head of the PLO, who is strong in the southern districts. Recently, the former Tanzim chief, Marwan Barghouti, who's currently serving 6 life sentences in an Israeli jail for multiple terrorist murders, was proposed to be the next leader, which would allow al-Alul and Rajoub to be his vice presidents. There are several candidates in line for the 3rd position in the Palestinian leadership. The candidates include Saeb Erekat, the Secretary General of the PLO Executive Committee, who served as a senior negotiator in many failed peace negotiations with Israel, General Majed Faraj, the head of the Palestinian Security Services, Rami Hamdallah, the Palestinian Prime Minister, Hussein al-Sheikh, the Deputy Prime Minister who oversees relations with Israel, and Nasser al-Qudwa, Yasser Arafat's nephew. With us to discuss these issues is Dr. Mordechai Kedar, Research Associate at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies at Bar-Ilan University. Thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Can you discuss the decline of European influence in the Middle East?
Well, the Europeans are, first of all, are divided. There are all kinds of ways how they look at the Middle East. There is the Belgian one, there's the French one, there's the British one, and there's the Eastern Europe, which is totally different. So they don't really have any steady agenda, united agenda vis-a-vis the Middle East. So when they don't have one united approach, who takes them seriously? Second thing, from the economic point of view, the European economy is on the shingles. So nobody really takes them seriously. And not only this, in the Middle East, the only states which are taken seriously are states which maintain power, like Russia, like the United States. Europe doesn't fight. So why should anyone in the Middle East take them seriously? So this is why they actually lost their role. They actually are much more concerned with their domestic problems, with the immigrants who come from the Middle East, and with other problems which they are concerned about. So really, they have lost most of the role which they ever had in the Middle East. And only in Israel, they are influential by the money which they give to all kinds of organizations which work against the government day and night.
Can you talk about the increasing areas of understanding between Trump and Putin in Syria?
The Russians actually now started to listen to Trump because they, I believe, are rather concerned about what this man can do to them, if not militarily, but economically. They are very concerned about this. So they started also to take Trump seriously. And when he wants to have, let's say, silent area in the southern part of Syria, they are listening to what the man wants. And when he opposes any Iranian settlement in Syria, they also listen to the man, and they try to act in a way which will not aggravate Trump too much.
And how much of that is actually at the expense of Iran?
Well, Iran today is the target of America. It's more than clear. And lo and behold, all the friends of Iran actually are leaving Iran, because what we see today, that the Syrian regime doesn't like the Iranians to put their weapons in hangars which the Syrian army uses, because they are afraid that Israel will attack them. When they see today that Iran actually is in domestic problems, because there are all kinds of arrests inside Iran, when the currency of the Iranians is deteriorating rapidly, and too many people in the Middle East already smell the demise of the Iranian regime. It might take a year or maybe 2 years, but under the American pressure, they actually have no chance.
What do you think will be the impact of the Trump summit in North Korea on the U.S. nuclear policy for Iran?
Definitely. First of all, the North Koreans helped the Iranians with their nuclear program. Don't forget, the facility which Israel bombed in Syria was a project run by the North Koreans, sponsored by the Iranians on the Syrian soil. So definitely there are all kinds of meetings between the Iranian regime and the North Korean regime, especially in the nuclear program. And if North Korea succumbs to the pressure of the American president, it shows that this man has no limits, and he will continue on Iran, no doubt, especially if he succeeds to coerce the North Korean regime to obey the American dictates.
We just heard word that Abbas has been released from the hospital. What does this mean for the Palestinian Authority?
Not much. This man could have another week or 2 weeks or a month or 2 months. The man is very sick. He is swollen. His face is very swollen compared to what it was a year ago. He smokes heavily, and his health is in deterioration. So, okay, he might have an additional time, which will be maybe weeks or months, but the end of his time is already there. And we already see how people try to find some substitute, and nobody really found yet. And he doesn't nominate anyone. The Palestinian Authority is viewed as illegitimate. I personally think that he will be the last accepted or legitimate leader of the Palestinian Authority. And after him, there might be a domestic chaos which will force Israel to implement the only solution which can work on the ground, which is the Emirates solution. Means every city for itself, run by the clans of that city, while Israel remains in the rural areas forever, in order to make sure that Hamas doesn't take the area and turns the West Bank, or the Judea and Samaria rather, to another Hamastan, just like what they did in Gaza. So this, I think, will be the only solution, which, by the way, corresponds with the sociology. Because in the Arab world, the only thing which works is Emirates, which are based on clans, rather than states which are based on dreams about nations which do not exist.
That's Dr. Mordechai Kedar. Thank you very much for your insight today.
Pleasure.
And now a roundup of this week's regional stories, the news in brief. 13 women's rights activists in Saudi Arabia were arrested last weekend, some of them caught driving cars before the lifting of the ban on June 24th. The arrests have sparked concern that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has rolled back on his promise to advocate women's rights. Salman's loosening of the constraints on women was a major part of his reform program entitled Vision 2030, which he launched last year, and many applauded it as changing the trajectory of the conservative kingdom and adapting to the political, economic, and technological innovations of the 21st century. Progress for women was a main theme in his 3-month tour of the U.S. to raise the image of Saudi Arabia and garner investments. His motive for arresting women's rights activists still remains in question. Saudi researcher Faisal al-Sarhid, the director of the Science and Technology Unit at the Saudi Electronic University, can finally converse with his robot in Arabic. Al-Sarhid is currently developing the robot to be more aware of his surroundings and to move on its own. He plans to utilize the robot to work in customer service centers and teach in universities. The invention is in line with Saudi Arabia's technological innovations, with the introduction of the $500 billion mega city announced by Saudi Crown Prince in 2017.